A few years ago, after I ended a relationship which was very static and mundane due to my own faults, the person I used to be in it with moved to New York City to finish their degree. There were a few options, but that was the one which was the most wild and different from what we knew, and I could say with some certainty that part of that was from how boring I kept things. Finally free to go off and do as ever they wished, they wanted the chance to do it like nowhere else, a city that never sleeps. The place you live is inherently part of your identity in that it very much shapes your opportunities and so who you'll become, and this was someone really seeking to find that part of their identity that had been put on the shelf by me and some other factors for a couple of years. We still talked even right after the breakup, and we remained close enough that I went up there multiple times to help move or just to visit. It was a bit shocking seeing how much they could change into someone who felt more fun and vibrant. Well, I was still very much stuck in my ways, always worried about so many things before my own enjoyment ever came into the picture. They were outgrowing who I was. I'd always thought about moving somewhere that could feel more conducive to who I wanted to be, but the stability of remaining in my hometown, the responsibilities I have here, and the fear of making the wrong decision have always kept me planted where I am. I've struggled with this a lot recently. How do I become the person I want to be in the wrong place for that kind of person? How do I overcome the expectations which kept me as who I am here when I could go somewhere new without those and be whoever I wanted to be? But what if I got there and I learned it wasn't what I wanted, having already committed so much to it? I wish it was possible just to wake up there for a little bit, live as who I wanted to be, and uncover how it felt. I wish there was any way to do it without possibly ruining myself financially. Something like, I don't know, waking up in a dream to be someone else somewhere else. Well, this is the premise for Your Name, one of the most well-regarded anime films of the past decade. Mitsuha, a high schooler in a rural town, has dreams where she feels awake and aware of what's happening as a Tokyo boy named Taki. But as her friends and family begin to tell her about how she was acting strange some days before, and as Taki begins to feel the same thing, the pair discovers that they're not dreaming, they're actively swapping bodies on some days despite having no connection to the other. They hurriedly check the notes app on their phones to see someone else taking them, and this gives them something of a solution. They can communicate halfway through these means, setting rules and reporting on the days missed and things like that. Of course, some hijinks ensue from all of this, but maybe this weird occurrence is exactly what Mitsuha needed. She really is the classic story of a young person desiring anywhere but the small town that they grew up in, which has defined their life so far. And she does represent what this feels like to a high degree, because who she is in this town isn't based on her decisions, but rather on her responsibilities. One of the benefits to a small town is that sense of community from everyone knowing everyone. We see this as they sit by the few vending machines in their town, they say hello to everyone who passes because there is no anonymity to be rude, and you have some kind of easy connection to everyone, making kindness just more available to everyone around. The same person I was speaking of earlier grew up in a very small town, and when I would visit there, it was honestly quite shocking how everyone was someone's neighbor or coworker or their sister's chiropractor or their uncle's dentist. Each person who came by one of the couple local restaurants knew you and you knew them. But this also means that everyone knows your family and your past and where exactly you come from, and these things define who you are to a more extreme degree in such a small setting. Mitsuha is the daughter of the town's somewhat corrupt mayor, making her the butt of many jokes about him or politics in general, despite her having no impact on those things and even being actively separated from her father's care. He abandoned her really, but he's still mocked at her expense. Her mother's side of the family is also responsible for maintaining their local spiritual traditions, from being caretakers of the shrine to performing the rituals which go along with it. One of these is making kuchi kamazake, a sake which begins the rice's fermentation process by chewing it and spitting it back out. This is an intricate public display of their customs which Mitsuha has to take part in, even though her classmates easily pass by and judge her for it. Once again, this is something she's being actively judged for that isn't a choice of hers, but a responsibility of hers. The most notable aspects of her aren't actually anything about who she wants to be, but what her lineage has determined she should be. This leads to an exceptional amount of frustration on her part, of course, where she screams into the night,
"I hate this life too! Please make me a handsome Tokyo boy in my next life!"
and naturally, this is exactly what's been happening in her dreams, where she enters Taki's life. In a twist of fate which could never occur for us, she gets to live the risk-free trial of a different life. So how does this go, and what does it lead her to do? Well, of course, it comes with a heavy dose of expectations versus reality. When we imagine other places and different lives, we tend to daydream about the positive aspects. When we think of vacation, we don't focus on how awful the travel is. We're happy to be experiencing these new, exciting things somewhere else. It's much easier to romanticize things we don't know because, well, we don't know them. The negative aspects simply won't become clear to someone who isn't living them unless they're explicitly and directly mentioned. I remember going up to stay in New York one of those times for a while I was working freelance so I could take this laptop and go anywhere, and to be honest, I loved it. You could walk right around the corner to get pizza, you would take the subway to these great museums, being able to be around people and meet everyone everywhere, it was fantastic. But the literal first experience I had was dealing with a cockroach problem because where I was staying was right next to a restaurant and an alleyway where everyone stored trash. If you live behind a restaurant in New York City, you're just gonna have to deal with some roaches or pests or things like that. That's how it is. They could mitigate the issues, of course, but there's no way to outright prevent it. It's just a part of being there. Living where I am now, I never had to consider the implications of a place being behind a restaurant, so I could have easily locked myself into a lease where I'd be seeing them every day if I was the one who moved up there. Basically the exact same thing that happened to them. Of course, we see this with Mitsuha. Well, she adores the chance to go to all the kinds of cafes she didn't even have one of back home and eat all the things she'd only seen pictures of before. It comes with having to work a hectic job to pay for how overpriced they are. As she remarks,
"I could live for a whole month on what these pancakes cost."
Instead of weaving threads back home with her family for the festival, which is a tough act in its own right, but still a relaxed one, she's now rushing around a restaurant desperately trying to remember the menu and not mess up orders and take plates and get yelled at by the chef and deal with assholes who are completely lying, and then this is all after being late because she got lost in the absolute chaos of navigating such crowded spaces like the train where she can hardly find room to literally breathe. Now, she can live how she wants, but she gets to live far less overall since her time is dedicated to working for survival and having to pay for that new lifestyle. It is a more concentrated version of living. Everywhere we go will have trade-offs like this, so we have to determine if they're worth it. Does this place validate who we want to be? Mitsuha makes this determination with one of her coworkers, Okudera. She's a college student who's admired by everyone else, and Mitsuha grows close to her at first by helping to sew up a rip in her work uniform, setting her apart from everyone else who simply just pines over her mindlessly through her own unique action, helping out with a direct skill. In the company they find together, Mitsuha sees exactly what she was missing from her person back home and being judged not for what others made her, what her past or family decided she was, but for what she decided to set herself apart as. The hustle and bustle of the city provides a more individual mindset, as well as a level of anonymity which makes the first sparks of connection harder, but allows for it to begin from a completely original place once it is made, and on this she thrives as the pair goes on many of what are essentially dates. We see that what she finds in this connection is validating to her and well worth all of the costs associated with this different kind of life. Rushing around sucks, but the places she's rushing to are better than the ones she lazes about at home. It isn't really the city itself that makes her more fulfilled, but what the space of the city can allow her to be. The mismatch which was present in her character can be solved if she would enter this kind of space like what we see. And this fact is seemingly confirmed when she lives at home in her own body after some of this. She plans a detailed and intricate date with Okudera, but the day it occurs, Taki is in control of his body, not her. Despite doing all of the work of this relationship and what it meant to her, she never gets to see it through on its most important moment. This sends her into a depressive state as, despite being the town festival and the brightest night of a comet passing overhead, Mitsuha is simply sitting at home not wanting to go out the entire day. Why go out when she has to be in this place, which is confirmed to feel so awful for her now? But after being coerced by her friend, she does commit to heading out, but only after a change. Earlier, she had her grandmother cut her hair much shorter, an obvious and distinct change from how she looked before. This is a sort of compromise with her situation and a commitment to what she desires. First of all, it forces others to actively consider her through this physical difference. Now when they see her, they'll see someone a little bit different than the person from before, and that bit of immediate shock can spur the mind on. It makes you lead to wonder why they made that change. It replaces the usual initial thought of shrine girl or mayor's daughter with something new. It is the start of becoming someone new to the people around her to find that fulfillment she lacks. And as an alteration that would take years to reverse, it's also a dedication to change. She can't just add hair back overnight. She knows what she desires, and she's going to see it through by making it obvious and non-reversible at once. And this is, unfortunately, a great representation of what change actually takes to occur. This relies on the basic principle that one of the things that makes any life form work in terms of survival is pain and variations of pain. When you touch something hot, your body sends a sensation of pain from your fingertips to your brain, and all of this basically shouting, whoa, move your hand from there, because that unpleasant feeling drives you to stay away from that harmful action that was causing you physical pain. It's the quickest way to pull us away from harmful things. And it conditions you to more positive outcomes, to touching things that aren't going to burn you. Most negative emotions function in this kind of way. Being uncomfortable forces you to sit differently because you're slowly harming a little part of your body, and being angry at a family member forces you to voice your opinion and put change on the table so that hopefully it doesn't happen again. And feeling depressed about your life and the places you are makes you consider if finding somewhere else will work better for you. Our bodies don't want to exist in these uncomfortable states, so we either cope or find change. Feeling discomfort with your current situation is one of the key factors of change, because if everything was fine, you wouldn't even consider that things needed to be different. And that last fact shows why experience is important. Sometimes things look fine, but only because our vision is limited. By living this different life, Mitsuha was able to confirm that yes, she did require a change in her life, and by feeling that depression, she was able to begin making that change when she cut her hair. This drove her not to desire blankly, but to actively seek out what she desired as was possible. Only by seeing new places will we have the contrast necessary to know if ours is right for us, which means that experiencing as much as possible is crucial to being a fulfilled person. Exploration and decision is critical to the human condition, to discovering our discomfort and then to solving it. And only by our actions does this occur, as we can never be so lucky as Mitsuha to swap bodies. When I took that trip to a new city, I was forced to consider my own satisfaction here from a new contrast. I highly value stability, but now I actually saw what I was sacrificing for it. I had removed a layer of ignorance. While I remained where I am, I was aware of a discomfort that made me seek out similar experiences where I'm at, and that led me to meet new people and do new things that greatly improved my life. The reason most of you know me now is because of the chain that this set forward from that desire and the stories it led me to tell on this channel. Pain drives our choices, which drives us, and your name did a great job of developing this message. Almost, because then the comet turns into a meteor and Mitsuha dies and all agency is removed because fate. Everything that happens or is explained from this point on in the movie is a moment where you can distinctly see the hand of the writer. Why does it happen? Because it was the most dramatic thing that could happen. That night of depression Mitsuha had, it wasn't actually about the date or identity, it's later explained to be about the fact that she had fallen in love with Taki. Somehow, even though their only interactions thus far are waking up to discover that the other one had done something with their body that they didn't wish for, to the point of extreme frustration. Mitsuha is ashamed and overwhelmed by how Taki acts in her body. He makes her much more popular, but she never asked to be popular or have attention on her. In fact, everything about her character was about the kind of attention she was getting. So he's not providing a benefit to her, but she falls in love with him to the point of taking a trip to Tokyo to find him, only to actually meet him on the train, but he doesn't recognize her because between them is a 3-year gap, so Taki hasn't met her yet. they're actually swapping bodies across time. They share an awkward interaction which expresses this, yet when she hops off the train in this embarrassment, he suddenly calls out to her to ask her name despite them standing next to each other for a good while, and then grabs onto the red string she throws him, a literal nod to the red string of fate tying them together. None of these actions actually make sense for what we know of these characters. They have no reason to be in love, and he has no reason to reach for the string, which she has no reason to remove in the first place. But it happens because it's very dramatic and plays into this idea of going, oh wow, I didn't catch that yet when you're watching the movie, at the cost of destroying those thematic elements which began super strong. What's happening now isn't Mitsuha acting on her own desires for change, but simply acting a determined part of the future dictated to her as the pair plays out a variation on the Red String of Fate story. This is an old legend which, in its most simple terms, states that everyone is connected to another person by an invisible red string on their fingers. Due to this, these people will be drawn together no matter what they do. The legend this is based off of all go something like, a man meets someone who can see the string, who guides him to the person on the other end of the string, but then he sees it's not up to his standards and is dissatisfied with the result and harms that woman on the other end in some way, but years later he's actually coincidentally married to the woman he harmed, which becomes clear from either a story they tell or a physical scar left from the harm that they dealt to them, but they live happily together nonetheless with forgiveness and things like that. I hate all of these stories because each one is someone being rewarded for not learning a lesson or changing. These are arrogant people doing awful or stupid things and not listening to a wise person, but still meeting the perfect person for them who always forgives them for their past mistakes despite the story having no signs of growth whatsoever. At least the ones I found, although they very well may have been shortened or summarized or something like that. But even so, what it's saying is that their actions don't matter. Whatever they do, they will be led to this specific person. What this means is that they have no agency. They have no reason to consider why they are satisfied or not, because satisfaction will come to them through the shortening of the string. Mitsuha's story becomes pointless because she dies, the story shifts to Taki, and in the end, after disastrous prevented from magic, they meet again and all the changes in her life were dictated by Taki's plan, which is dictated by fate, so she had no input on making the changes which would fulfill her, and neither did he because he forgets it all anyway. So, on that swap to Taki, because what he adds is just as maddening and coming so close but missing the point. The meteor falls, which to him happened 3 years ago, so suddenly the swaps with Mitsuha just randomly stop as far as he knows. He grows obsessed with what he lost and draws parts of her town unendingly until he eventually uses them to try and find where it is to meet her, only to realize it was the town destroyed 3 years ago. He takes a trip to the shrine from her family's faith, where he finds the Kuchi Kamizake that he left there as her and drinks it, and after doing so he slips, witnesses a drawing on the cave ceiling, and wakes up as Mitsuha the day of the disaster and forms a plan to try and prevent it. Now there is almost something to say here because what we witness in him is similar to what we see in Mitsuha. Taki was living a life he was perfectly fine with, but from the chance encounter of the body swaps, he got a glimpse of something else which changed his perspective. He was more fulfilled when he was able to be a part of Mitsuha's life and fall in love with her. However nonsensical that is, it is still something which made his life better and he didn't recognize it before. Living without it, then he was suddenly much less happy about life because he was aware of this, because he had seen something new and experienced it and realized there was something more important to him that he wouldn't have known without living something new. It looks as if he's about to change from experience, a key fact of life we can always do with a reminder of. He turns obsessive in his drawings, trying to make them perfect and refusing to give up on finding Mitsuha, and once he learns the truth, this only grows worse and worse, and so he runs off to try and find that holy spot and hope anything would allow him to connect with her once more and just fix things or save her or anything. And that act of commitment is to that new thing that he desired over what he knew leads him to be able to have it one more time, to save the day and save her, and now he knows her name again and won't forget it. He won't be able to be with her, but having succeeded in his quest will solve his obsession and he will grow into a much stronger and more dedicated person from this act. And maybe, since he did so, fate will reward him with a shortening of the string in the future. Oh, no, wait, he forgets her name immediately, and in fact goes on to forget the entire experience and live an unfulfilling young adult life while all his friends are getting great jobs or his former flings are getting married and he's sitting there stuck doing nothing because he forgot what was supposed to change him and make him a better person. The most infuriating fact of this movie is that for no reason other than drama, he forgets her name and everything he did for her on that final day, which leaves him deeply unfulfilled and on a much worse path, and then in the 11th hour, they by chance meet 5 years later, catching eyes on passing trains and run each other down the streets to reconnect. The movie ends, and we assume they will fall in love and live happily. So despite even performing a genuine act of dedication to commit himself to personal change, he forgets it and as such learns nothing. His life is growing worse and he's doing nothing to fix it because he's obsessed with the moment he forgot and doesn't even know he forgot. And even though there is nothing positive in their decision-wise, they meet again and are rewarded by fate. And Mitsuha in that has no agency whatsoever. She is technically integral in saving the town as Taki's plan failed and she convinces her father to evacuate the town, knowing the comet will turn into a meteor. But we don't see how she does that, and in fact, it may only happen because Taki spoke his mind as her earlier to her father, so it might not have even been anything she really did at all. Either way, her story ends when she's either hit by a meteor or avoids being hit by it, and neither option really matters because we never get to see her handle her issues surrounding satisfaction, and in fact, we learn the solution was love dictated by fate, and then it just happens in the end because fate. What's the point of anything either of them did if this is the result? They make a big deal of going, oh, no one could have seen this disaster coming in reference to the comet splitting into all these pieces, but shouldn't that exact message be in support of not undoing the past then, and instead living with chance since we can't fight against what's going to happen with fate? You could say maybe it's about fighting fate or working around it in some way since they kind of do that, but fate is still what rewards them in the end, so which side is it actually on? Couldn't it have been a great message about acceptance and growing as a person and finding satisfaction through experience in contrast to understand it, where Taki takes over the story from where Mitsuha couldn't anymore and brings forth the kind of change a person needs to? But no, we don't get that. We get another telling of the same weird romance story that makes no sense but happens anyway because that's what's satisfying to watch, I guess. I'm speaking so negatively about the second half of this movie because the first half was really good. The way it introduced its premise is a great way to express these two characters and their contrasts at the same time as showing how related to physical context it is. By seeing what annoys one and satisfies the other, we get a great feel for both of their key traits at the same time, and at the same time as moments of comedy, all based around the core principle of the movie. It's really tight. It is quite possibly one of the best platforms for a message that's ever been laid in 30 minutes time, all in a super engaging way. And then it just all falls to the side for a few twists, and then the twists are undone in their importance anyway, so what's the point of having the twists? The meteor kills her. Oh wait, no it doesn't, but oh no wait, he forgets that, so they're basically just strangers again anyway, and what was the point of anything we witnessed? Why did any of it matter? How do you make amnesia an even more maddening plot device than usual? Why did he write I love you and not his fucking name? My man really said gotta have Riz over the most important moment of his life. This issue of why did it matter is a problem I have with the idea of fate in general, or to apply a term with less immediate connotations to it, fatalism. Fatalism is the idea that the end state of a system is determined by forces such as fate or destiny, and there is nothing which can change this outcome. Now, the system could be anything from your entire life to just one single workday. It is distinct from determinism, which is a theory more in line with scientific thinking, in that it explains all things through causes and effects. This had to occur because this or these occurred before it is determinism. Fatalism does not explain through causes and effects, but through a force outside of such things. As it appears in your name, we'll be discussing a soft form of fatalism, which states that some things are determined by fate, but not all things. So you could follow any number of paths, but certain events will remain the same between them. They'll intersect in certain places. This means it can coexist with free will because you are choosing your actions along the way, and they very well may be the result of you as an independent agent. But no matter what, those actions will lead you to certain points. You could meet your soulmate at 22 or at 57, but one way or another, you are fated to meet them. There is no interest in explaining why it occurred, and no attempt to, but simply the recognition that it had to occur. This is one of my problems with the idea of fate, that it never actually explains how the action occurs, but simply adds a narrative to the action. In that way, it is more or less a search for meaning rather than a search for how the universe works or whether or not we have agency. It doesn't matter if you have free will or not, or how the universe works, or how far back cause and effect can go, because these things will occur from a magic force beyond our control. This is what's often pointed to actually as a benefit of fatalistic thinking, though, that it is essentially a means of coping with a world that so often feels random and pointless in very expansive and confusing ways. You tried your best to achieve a certain end, but it didn't occur, leaving you in a state of despair. However, there should be no despair, because it was simply not a fault of your character effort, but rather of fate. The state which you sought was not one which was fated to occur. This is an important distinction. It is not an argument which says nothing changes based on our actions and so we shouldn't bother trying. At least a soft version isn't saying that, but rather it is a way to cope with the fact that things are outside of our control in a simple and understandable way. Looking at chance, or the long chain of events leading all the way back through time, called cause and effect, that can effectively be called chance because we are limited humans with limited perspectives, and calling that the agent of everything feels very dissatisfying. But applying the label of fate to it creates a more palatable and understandable option. We wish for our life to be in our own hands, but upon witnessing it isn't always so, we at least wish for it to be in some hands at all, and fate can be that. It preserves some sense of value that the world is more than just probability in which we float through. When we consider these kinds of things, it does seem like a beneficial theory for right now. In the same way that there's no reason to scoff off astrology or witchcraft or religion when they provide no harm to others and a true psychological benefit to the user, regardless of the truth of what they believe in, there is no reason to deny someone the concept of fate when it simply allows them to cope with an unyielding and harsh world that we are all struggling against together. Especially for someone struggling to come to terms with the lack of control inherent to our world. For example, you can control which job you take, but you cannot control, at least not immediately, the need for a job to survive. This is simply an extension of the basic principles of survival through our modern contexts. That is to say, it's the same as saying you must eat, sleep, and drink to survive. Facing this lack of control is often a maddening task, which takes so many actions across so many times, and yet so few of them matter in the grand scheme of things. I can completely change who I am and where I live and everything about me and my appearance and my life and all of it, but none of that will change that I have to work. Fate is a means of explaining such things, coming to terms with powerlessness to avoid the despair which comes from failing to do so. With this, there's also a kind of social benefit in recognizing that one is not an important agent of the universe. We're not the main character directing all of the action, and so the idea that we are important enough to outweigh others must follow, defeating the rampant individualism which can destroy society in the same way that a total form of conformity can. If one understands that they cannot do exactly as they please, well, they won't trick themselves into believing that they have the right to do anything and everything. However, as with anything, each of these benefits can become detriments in new contexts. While the idea of fate can help us to cope with an inability to change some things and does not entail an inability to change everything, it can easily become an excuse to do so. The reason it says we should act is also the reason why it could say that we should not. We are unsure of what our fate is. We can reason any single outcome as something directed by fate, which easily becomes a way to justify what occurred as what must occur no matter the case. This is often pointed to as a huge ethical issue, as it robs the responsibility for our own actions from the equation. If we were fated to perform an action which is designated as a crime or is overall negative, are we responsible for it? How do you balance out good and bad actions through rehabilitation or punishment, or even what is the point of doing so to begin with when any of them could have just been fated occurrences and not someone's will?
And if man is not judged by their choices, then how are we really deciding who is good and who is evil?
Similarly, it reduces our own actions. If we have a great triumph but call it fate, then we also lose the benefits of having accomplished something of our own volition, since it had to happen no matter what. If we increase the scale of the fated action, it can extend this into an excuse for inaction overall quite easily. If we believe our fate is to one day succeed or to one day fail, then what reason is there to take any active strides to do so right now? Maybe we say that our input is still required to achieve the possibility fate is directing to, or make it come quicker, but then the entire concept breaks down. How could I become a successful creator if I never created in the first place? If it is fated to happen, then the actions that lead me to it must be fated as well, and so I must not have free will at all then. Fatalism or fate are not concepts which inherently excuse inaction, but they are undeniably catalysts for such a thing when overused, and as a coping mechanism, they are specifically designed for comfort, and as such can easily become overused. It's a neutral concept. While it can cope with some negative aspect of life, it also kind of copes down the positive ones. We also have to consider the health of our beliefs in comparison to the overall potentials. I'm not going to be the first one to make this argument, but I believe that the idea of true free will is the healthiest option overall, because if we consider the two extremes, that everything will happen as it's fated to, that already determined, we have no control over it, or that nothing is fated to happen, no determination, and we have free will to dictate outcomes, then we can consider the implications of each. Say the argument against free will is correct, then it doesn't matter what one believes or does, the outcome will always be the same. Believing either theory leads to no difference in outcomes. However, if free will does exist, there is a difference in what we believe. Those who believe it does not exist will act as if it doesn't, and as such not exercise control over their actions, even though they do have it, where those who believe it is true will do so and benefit from that. So if free will is true, then the belief in it is healthier, and it has no negative impact on the outcome if it is not true and one believes in it. Since neither side can be proven as true or false, the safest option is then to believe that free will does exist rather than not. And since we cannot determine what is fate and what is not, even a soft fatalism is a more dangerous belief than free will. The best thing we can do for ourselves and others is to believe that we are the arbiters of our lives, taking responsibility for all of our good and bad actions alike, learning and actively growing from them. I also personally argue against things solely for the sake of comfort, editing me coming in hot here with the correction because that last noun sounded awful because it was written awful. What I meant by I'm against things that are strictly for comfort isn't like, oh, don't wear comfortable things or, don't watch shows that comfort you. I just wrote that poorly. What I meant is like, don't ignore your problems simply for comfort. Don't become, over obsessed with everything being comfort. So basically what I'm trying to say is I'm against everything being a sort of comfort, not I'm against things being comfortable because that would be stupid. Exactly for the theme that your name was beginning to develop in Mitsuha before fate was introduced so heavily, where we uncover that the changes we need to make in life are through new experiences which introduce discomfort. The fact that we are feeling such negative things is a sign that we desire some kind of change, right? So is coming to terms with that and not changing it actually a healthy option? Do you tell someone in pain that the best option is just to ignore the pain? Do you hold their hand on the stove and say, come to terms with it? Ignoring uncomfortable things may make us immediately happier, but it denies some fundamental aspects of ourselves and hedges bets to achieve some level of happiness at the cost of never finding a greater one. The social benefits of fate also fall apart here, as the way things which seem immovable change is when many people feel the same discomfort. If people in the past would have accepted that, well, I guess a 7-day work week is just fate, it's unavoidable, then we'd still be having them now, and that would be awful. But the collective pain of being worked to death led people to fight for something better and achieve it, which we now benefit from. Placating that pain through acceptance of, well, that's how the world is, or we are just powerless to change it, would have done nothing but prolong injustice. This is not the case for all things. There are always some things which can't be avoided. Again, enter survival. You have to eat and sleep and drink. However, this does not mean that every method of survival through our current lens is required. There are always different ways to achieve it, and so I believe we should be very cautious in the comfort we find. Is that comfort disrespecting something greater about us? This is what I hate about fate in your name. We saw two characters who each had the potential to change and performed acts of dedication to that change in line with the principle of discomfort, but those actions failed to matter at the end at all for dramatic effect. Taki never changes or moves out of his depression alone. He forgets the experience entirely of having done something new and suffers for it, but that suffering is of course eased by romantic gain, which to me is a nauseating idea. This is really the end? Instead of ever changing, these two people who showed every sign that they would be better off from doing so don't. And romance is what will make them both happy despite the fact that they have no connection other than fate due to dramatic effect, making it all pointless? What's the point of it then? Why try to be happy if fate is just going to do it for you one day? To be fair, Your Name is also saying that you can work around some aspects of fate. For example, the meteor had to fall, but no one had to die. The death was not fated, only the falling was. This is exactly how the situation is solved and the good ending can occur. There is clearly some interplay of personal action in the hand of fate, but this still robs them of their agency in regards to something so important as identity. It still decrees that two random people will find their happiness not through their own actions, but through something preordained, because despite fighting off fate that little bit as they do, this is not what makes them happy. The result that fate decreed still was. Maybe we're just working towards positive fated outcomes which require our input to be as ideal as they can be, but that just means our lives aren't fully our own at the end of the day. And maybe that's the healthier belief, to recognize that we are not in control of most things. But I can't set aside the fact that comfort and acceptance are the enemy of change, and that those depressing things we hate never change, in part because so many people have found comfort around them or accepted them despite everything else. We do have control if we all begin to believe that we do. I'd rather stay aware of some level of unhappiness and fight for a truly happy future than come to terms with an at best average one. And if fate is real and says no, then it didn't matter either way, so might as well try. Your Name is a deeply entertaining movie, but put under the microscope, it falls apart entirely. And of course, I'm not saying don't like it or that liking entertaining things is bad on the whole, but I do think we should spend a bit more time understanding why we like things, to come to terms with these realizations, to find our discomforts, and to change from the better from them. I'm going to try and ignore the fact that I flubbed that last line on my script here and go into the off-the-cuff outro-y bit. One quick thing. I'm not saying don't like the movie. I'm not saying you're stupid for liking it. I'm not saying it's bad. It's still entertaining, like I just said. So please keep any they're saying don't like good things comments out of here, because that's not what I'm saying. I just like to think about ourselves in higher concepts through media, because that provides a platform to discuss it and to bring people in and make them think about things in a new way with something they already thought about. It's just kind of a cool thing I'm doing, I think. But anyway, little squeaky rant over. There's going to be 2 links in the pinned comment. There'll be a Discord server where some fans hang out and chat, and I swear I will be back in there more prominently when things calm down a little bit. But there's also a link to my Patreon where these lovely people above me help support me doing squeaky rants every couple of weeks, and I hope long into the future. But anyway, I'll just say thank you to everyone for spending some time with me here today, and I hope I'll see you again soon.